thank you everyone for joining. I think that National Statute may not be the most charismatic, uh, like on the surface, the most charismatic topic matter. Be like, oh, national statutes, but I were just talking, had kind of the best time editing this, like just like the conversations and everything. And it, even though it's sort of like a rules regulation thing, it really is this document that kind of crystallizes a lot of intent, a lot of attitude, a lot of culture, and it's important in that way. And like, it's just like really, really fun to dive into this. Um, so I guess I can now casually begin to respect everyone's time since we're 2 minutes into the hour. Wow, I need a haircut. Look at this. Okay. So national statute, just kind of starting from the beginning, maybe a lot of people already know this. We are a nonprofit and we do have our bylaws and articles of incorporation and that kind of like high governing, legal matters. The national statute is like kind of like one step below that. It's like our self-created, as Michelle put it, kind of rule book in a way, guidebook. It is not an end all be all, like we still have like, handbooks and like how we should interact in our own cultures of our chapters and our groups. But the national statute is kind of this high level agreement. Like we're all here to do slow food. How should we slow food together at a kind of a minimum, right? And as we found in this process, rules and regulations are kind of dry, but the conversations to get there, the conversations that decide what rule, what guide, what statute to put in, we did have to wrestle with like culture of slow food, the dignity and respect that we owe each other, really deep stuff. So what I would like to say about it, and we're about to jump into it. Anna's going to speak. Charity and Tiffany are going to help us give some historical context. And this whole session here is hopefully quickly less talking heads. But once we set that kind of like stage, more just questions, discussions. What happens now? What do we do now? What is this thing? Any and all questions and conversations will be welcome, because this is one of those times we're making sure that we have time together to talk. So with that, the process for this, we will get into a little bit, but I want to first kind of hand it over to Charity and Tiffany, two people who are very involved with this, that have been involved with this more than just this time, to kind of give like kind of a bigger historical context of what the national statute revisioning process has been and what it has meant to kind of slow food and what it is today. So take it away, Charity and Tiffany, please.
Okay, I'll start, and then Tiffany can be her usual politics self and fix things that I'm omitting. But I went back, and actually it was kind of painful looking at the discussions that we had back in, I don't know even quite the date, when we first worked on, this is the third revision, I believe, that I've worked on. The first one was really driven by the board of directors and driven by lawyers. And the idea was kind of pare down the national statute and make it more consistent with the bare minimum that's required by the New York statutes. And Slow Food USA is incorporated in New York. And also, frankly, was making it less democratic, less of a representative organization. And the thing that really stands out in my memory is that there was a proposal that chapters would pay, and I forget what the fee was, $250 or $500, a charter fee to be chapters. And, like, oh my gosh. So I don't know why I got named to the working group or whether they regretted it, but as a former lawyer, I pull out the international statute, and our national statute is required to be consistent with the international statute, Slow Food International. And Slow Food International requires slow food national groups to share a portion of member fees, member dues with chapters, which Anna has finally really done a splendid job initiating after all these years of real tough financial times. But that was totally, in our mind, totally inconsistent with the idea of sharing. It was inconsistent with equity, inclusion, and diversity, because you're going to have the people who can pay to play. We're going to be able to have chapters. So the network rose up in opposition to that, and it was pared back, and a lot of our concerns were addressed. Then we go for the next group. It was struggling with how this network works, how it's supported. And the big idea that stood out for me was we were going to have champions. There was going to be some category of slow food supporters that are not chapters, that are not leaders, but are champions. And somehow that was going to be recognized. And as a consequence, also chapter leadership, people on the chapter boards did not need to be actual dues-paying members of Slow Food. And that caused a huge ruckus and debate. But and I think Tiffany can do this better, really think we need to emphasize how much better this conversation has been. Instead of just kind of a top-down, these are the things we're going to ram through kind of discussion. Felix and Anna and Giselle and people that were working on it from the beginning were very responsive to the network and really struggling to demonstrate what they saw, the strength of the network, and have it reflected in this statute. So the conversation was completely different. There was no racing around behind scenes and garnering votes and trying to throw, the shoes into the work, saboteur types, but really, I think a very productive, fun exchange about how to get the best of our network reflected in a statute, to reduce barriers to entry, to make it possible to be equitable, inclusive, and just, and align with the vision and the international statute and sense of Slow Food International. So Tiffany, that's my suggestion of it.
Well, thanks, Charity. So I'll try to take a little higher level since you got into the detail. But I would say that I agree with Charity. I think the first time I got asked to sit on a committee to revise the national statute, I was like, when have I looked at the national statute? Like, do we ever do that? Like, with the exception of starting a chapter or trying to find things in alignment, it's not something that we go to often. And so kind of got into this process where it was it's always been like a wonky policy conversation. How do we make snippets of changes to reflect what's actually happening in practicality? How do we defend pieces of the network or things that are important to us and make sure that folks are held accountable to that? And I really appreciate that this conversation, I think, started in a like, okay, what are we going to do with the national statute, but really evolved into just a great conversation around slow food and how do we participate and what kind of resources and guidance and common agreements do we need to do the work that we're doing, and how do we open this up so that it's not, not just changing tidbits of rules, but really trying to create something that is actually a functional document that helps to guide our work, that is a place that we can come back to when we have challenges or thinking through what we're going to be doing. And so I think that this was, for me, a very completely different experience. And I think the product is very different than what you all will have seen in the past. And so there are some pretty significant shifts, some in content, some in tone, some just in naming and the language that we use. But it's meant to be more accessible for the network to utilize, and also to help us to create a more accessible movement where everyone has their place and has like I said, a place to come back to ground them and to be able to move forward in the work. And so I would just say that this statute, I think, is more reflective, or maybe is equally reflective of where we are as a network and where we are as an organization. But I think in this moment is especially reflective of the national office's kind of renewed commitment to the network, commitment to EIJ, and commitment to fostering collaborations that help us to do the work.
Thank you, Charity and Tiffany, for that. Yeah, I weirdly, I don't really get excited about writing regulations and rules and stuff, but I am really excited about this. We're going to talk about what the major changes are in a second, and then open it up to questions and discussion. But first, I think people might want to know, like, what was the process? This process we keep talking about, like, what is that? And so, as Tiffany and Charity have mentioned, we wanted it to be more inclusive than before. As I said, like, we just don't want to write a national statute and then throw it on the shelf and it's like, all right, we're done, and like forget it for 2 years, right? We want something to be quite useful. So with that said, what we did, we recruited and asked for a bunch of our volunteer leaders who kind of can have experience in the network and history with slow food to kind of be our head editors. And that was Charity and Tiffany. We also had Scott Steen from the Tetons, Dan Miller who's on staff now, but from Slow Food San Diego, Shilu Patel, who's on our board now, but also was helping with governors and was a chapter leader herself. Mara joined in, who's also on staff now, but was a governor, started Slow Food Vermont, and then Anna and I just kind of helping facilitate. So we have people with chapter leader experience, people with working group experience, people who have been governors, and those were kind of the main sections that we touched to kind of help us be head editors to this thing. Because as you know, editing is not maybe the most fun thing in the world to do. So having like a small group is like more nimble. But the process we had, we met roughly once-ish a month and a half, to have like kind of these deep discussions with some sort of homework in between, to have the discussion on a topic, brainstorm very openly about it, and then kind of go back to our home circles and think about it, ruminate on it, talk to our people, whoever our circles are within slow food, get feedback, and then come back to the meeting with all that to kind of retouch based on that subject matter, and then move on to the next and so forth. We did that starting, I think it was in April. It was quite a long process. But again, those conversations were really rich, to kind of crystallize it down. And I had to give it up to Anna and her leadership with this, in the network, to all the volunteer leaders I've talked to through my whole time here, just asking for change, is asking for more horizontal leadership, more collaboration. All those tough conversations, all those rich conversations led us to this process to be able to like pare it down to what is a statute. And I would say this is in no way the end of the process. Having a statute that we can all be like, okay, this looks pretty good, is not saying, hey, once we ratify it, this is the end. I would say this is like the prequel, and once we ratify it, it's the beginning. Like, okay, now we have a statute, and what do we do now? Because like that gives us a high level national statutes, kind of like agreed upon baseline. And to me and to a lot of us who are editing it, we were very, very careful about tone, about words, about direction, because we think that's the best thing the national statute can give us. Like, what is our angle? What is our perspective? And then upon that, chapters, regional governors, now counselors, action teams can build upon that to create their own culture and their own direction within slow food. So this is very much just the beginning of that process, just to have a document to wrestle with. That was passed to the governors. We were talking about these at national roundtables. The Slow Food USA board has seen and touched and given feedback. And since like kind of December and now, we're looking for feedback from anyone related to slow food. As Anna will share in a second, the revision document is actually a Google Doc. And we are very much welcoming comments to that Google Doc of what you think, how this is. And then we do have to ratify it. And that's coming up after Leader Summit. So we're kind of saying February 1st, we're going to start the ratification, meaning is everyone agreeing that this is a good document for us to start our journey together. And so that's why we're kind of ending comments on at the end of the Leader Summit, because at some point we kind of stop making changes. So we have a document that's like, all right, this is it. Do people feel comfortable adopting this document and taking the next steps of building their own cultures and their own groups based on our shared agreements in the statute? So I'm sure that a lot of people are like, cool, that sounds kind of neat, but what changes did you make? Like, what are we talking about here? So I kind of want to pass it to Anna to kind of talk about, okay, what are we talking about? What is the meat on the bone here? No, Anna, are you there?
Felix, yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all here today. And thank you, Charity and Tiffany, for going through that history. And to Felix, thanks for all your work on the statute. As you transition off staff, I just, having your input throughout this whole document, I feel like we're in a good spot to go forward into the future, the next few years here. And as I mentioned last night, Dan Mueller, who's on this call, was part of this process and will also be stepping into the network engagement role to help with the next steps for this document. So we have a nice transition happening here. So now that we've had all that context about this document, I wanted to actually go ahead and share it with you all. I'm going to highlight again a few of the big questions that we are asking. And then what I want to do is give you all about like 5 minutes to look at it. Maybe you haven't read it yet. I just want to like pause and let you actually take a look, especially at the sections that are most relevant to you, whether you're part of a community action team or a governor, counselor, or a chapter, to really read that section and think about, does this resonate with you and your community? So the big questions, like others have said, is, how do we decentralize power? That was a theme throughout our conversations. How do we focus on collective action and collaboration more than power? So we'll share, and Brian, maybe this is a good time to share both the original version of the statute and the updated draft. And you'll see even some of the language shifts that we use here. Instead of like chapter powers, we're talking about chapter responsibilities and chapter benefits more than power. How do we create policies for healthy governance practices? This is a question, as people become leaders, burn out, or hold on to power, we need to create policies that create really healthy governing systems. How do we lead with joy? Instead of being like, you must do this, you must do that, really talk about slow food as this amazing opportunity to connect with each other and to do some really exciting work that ultimately leads to liberation for all, for freedom, for joy and delight. And that's really what we're going for here. How do we bake in equity from top to bottom and create accessibility to the Slow Food Network? So we're not always preaching to the choir, but we can get out and really focus on partnerships and invite other people in who maybe have not felt that they could access the Slow Food Network. And how do we deal with conflict mediation? This is something maybe we don't love to talk about publicly or with each other, but it's super important. And in the past few years, some chapters have folded because they had conflicts with individuals that they couldn't work through for many complicated reasons. But in this document, we wanted to create a better way to deal with conflict. So this came up especially with chapters. So we added a section to handle individual conflict issues. In the past National Statute, we only had a way to deal, basically, if there was a big problem at the chapter, we could like shut the chapter down, but we couldn't work with an individual on that basis. So we have now a code of conduct, which has been a really important guiding principle, and we're asking new leaders to sign on to that code of conduct, so we have a baseline understanding of how we should be operating together. And we have a process for escalation as needed. So if there's a conflict at the chapter level, the counselor can come in to help. If that doesn't work, the national office would be involved. And then what does success look like? What are the core expectations and benefits? So in the chapter section, you'll see if you want to compare the former one with the new one, then you'll see like some changes in language around that. And Brian, the former, I can just grab the link. This is the original. This is the original national statute from 2017. Okay, before, in the 2017 version, we talked about national working groups. What is a national working group? We weren't really sure. I think it was a very informal group that came together around, for example, Slow Food Nation's programming or something. But we really had no way to talk about these really important thematic networks forming across the country, like the food and farm policy team. That wasn't in the statute at all. Slow Books, Slow Fish, Slow Meat, all these amazing groups, Arc of Taste, had no way to be part of the national statute. At the same time, Slow Food International came out with a community model, which is a much more informal group. They're not a registered 501c3 necessarily. They have a much looser structure, more specific focus. So we got rid of the term national working group from the old statute, and we're calling it a community action team, so that this gives a place for a group of individuals who care about a specific thing, whether it's books or policy or a school garden in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. It gives them an organizing tool, essentially, to come together. And because they don't have, because they don't deal with funds, they don't need a formal board in the same way that a chapter needs a board. And if they do want to work with funds, they can either go through Slow Food USA as a fiscal agent. This is how Slow Fish has been operating, or they can partner with the local chapter. For example, I think about the Blue Watermelon Project in Phoenix is a great example. The last big change that we've made was with the governors. So we would ask questions like, what is the role of this very important group? What kind of person takes on this role? How do we diversify this group? And we talked a lot about how this group is really the mentor position and kind of a mediator between the national office and the local chapters, because, you know, as a small team at national, we don't have the capacity to have that real hands-on connection with every chapter leader as we want. So the regional counselors play a super important role in helping to mentor and facilitate local communities and chapters. So because of that, we wanted to change from the name governor, which feels kind of like a power political position, to regional counselor, which feels more like a mentor, a facilitator, a dialogue, a bridge to connecting national, local, international. This also mirrors the international statute, because we also have international counselors, and they kind of play the same role, but at the international level. Those were the big level changes. And before we go into, I want to give you some time to actually read this. Are there any quick clarifying questions or any issues that you want to bring up? You can either like hit the raise hand button on Zoom or just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Okay, let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. I will leave this up on the screen, but I hope that you can jump into the chat where Brian put the link to the national statute. You should be able to leave comments on this doc. Sarah is saying, as a newcomer to Slow Food USA from Africa, I was surprised by the term governor. Sarah, I hope counselor resonates with you a little bit more. So in the next 5 minutes, I'd ask you to look at your specific section, right? Like if you're a chapter leader, look at the chapter, look at Article 1. If you're and I'm gonna stop sharing here, but if you're a governor or a counselor, look at Article 3. And if you're part of Slow Books or Arc of Taste, look at Article 2 and see if it resonates feel free to put any kinds of questions or comments, even if it's like, this is confusing, or I hate this word, or whatever it might be. Just go ahead and put a comment in the Google Doc. Or if you're not comfortable with that technology, just write it down and we can go through it in about 5 minutes. So let's take a little pause. Brian's going to play some music so we can have some background noise, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes.
Hey everyone. So just, by the way, Brian, love the music. That's like very relaxing for me. Yeah, so we just want to give everyone a chance just to skim it. And again, this will be up as a Google Doc for the entire Leader Summit. But if you had a chance to see it quickly, we know a big group sometimes it's just like, wow, it's a lot of people here. And if you want to focus down on a certain topic, we're actually going to open breakout rooms. And we're going to do it by group. So the first breakout room will be chapters, and the statutes about chapters. The second one will be the statutes about action teams, aka working groups, new name, action teams. And the third room will be about governors, now called regional counselors. So when I open these breakout rooms, you'll see on your Zoom screen a chance to choose which room you want to go to. And you can jump rooms if you want. I think Brian's going to stay behind in the main room. So if you can't quite figure out how to jump rooms, you can always, in your breakout room, return to the main session. And Brian can help you. He's kind of like, he can be like Grand Central, help you find the other room you might want to jump into. So when you're lost, go back to the main room. Brian's got you. So I'm going to open up these breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back afterwards in one big group and kind of talk about it together. But for the next 15 minutes, you'll have a chance to talk about specifically chapters, action teams, or regional counselors, depending what room you choose. So I'm going to open the rooms, and you should see an option to choose which room you like to dive into. Hey, Brian. Everyone find their way, hopefully. It looked like they did.
We got a couple of folks in rooms. We're having trouble, and yeah, hopefully you all had great conversations.
Definitely. Everyone, sometimes the transition back to the main is kind of abrupt and crazy. So welcome back to the main room. Like,
that's too bad. We're in the middle of really important conversations. Too bad.
Let's continue them, because that's kind of, less than the last 10 minutes here. Just kind of like bringing everything back together. If there's anything to share. And again, I think next steps is my piece, and I'm going to say it very quickly in 1 minute or less, and then we'll open up to sharing what happened, those breakouts with everyone. Next steps, essentially, besides the ratification, which is kind of the next technical step, which is literally going to be a survey, like, what's your name? Yes or no? Are you in support of this? And getting everyone to vote on it. And we can ratify that in early February. The real important next step, as I kind of said in the counselor meeting, is like the national statute is like, again, the shared baseline. So we kind of all know the intent, but it doesn't really address the how, right? And that's kind of the next step. Like now that we have the statute and kind of have this like container-ish, it's like the how is next. Like, how do we do this? How do we make good on these intentions? And those are kind of like sharing resources, making those connections, maybe writing a handbook with best practices. But that's sort of the next iterations of this, that we hope we have a national roundtable meeting. Hopefully we'll have some regional meetings coming up and more chances to touch base and kind of wrap our heads around the how, how do we execute together collaboratively? So that's kind of the next steps and all I want to say. And so leaving the last minutes here, Charity, you said you had some rich conversations. Any rich conversations, questions, sharing of things that happened in the breakout rooms that we can talk about as a big group?
Well, I don't want to, I think Fernando was in the middle of making some really good observations about how this whole process feels to him, having been a member since 1995 and rejoined. And if he's willing, I think it would be good to share. I don't want to call him out though.
Here you go, Fernando. I can make an unmute button pop up on your screen, I think. Here you go.
There we go.
All right.
I was just two of the immediate questions were, how does my group slow? How do those existing programs work now? If we're pushing, it's a goal for this with the community action groups to push it down to a local level, and rather than and then try to manage those things. And it became clear through charity that it's really for the groups that want to expand, like the Arc of Taste, if they want to do it on a national level, or work as a group cross country or broader than their region. Those tenets in it seems, or those initiatives for each chapter, and those things that are global for slow food are still intact. This is just an opportunity to open those up, if I'm understanding that. But one of the I mentioned yesterday that the sort of thread through from what was to what is today, or where we will move to, there's because there's always a change on the local level of chapters depending on the group dynamic, and the wherewithal to do all the elements of slow food, or as many of those initiatives that you can with the group that you have, the resources that you have at hand. Oftentimes those are not connected with these umbrella groups that are working. There's no regular communication, for example, or there's not a strong through line from chapter to the top. If we add this this community action group, or reshape this to where it's this group already exists, you're just renaming it and shaping it. But I think we need to just be mindful of that and figure out how it is that we can not. It seems like the more mid-level and upper level activity that we have that's not conducted at the local level, it diminishes the local level participation. That's really kind of the point of what I'm speaking to.
Thanks, Fernando. I really appreciate that. I think one thing we've seen that we're trying to fix is like these silos happening where like Slow Fish is awesome and they're doing their work over here, but they're not connected to, like, especially the coastal chapters. Like Slow Food Miami was doing fish programming, but they didn't connect with Slow Fish, the national or really like continental entity. So community action teams need to be flexible in terms of their scope and scale, because there's so many different variations of it, from a local Arc of Taste committee to a national to a beyond. So we're trying to maintain like a really flexible template, and then using the regions to create more connections between teams and chapters, right? So that in the Southeast, right, Miami can connect with the Charleston fishing folks in that region and at least know what each other is doing. And I think communications is like the baseline of a strong, robust network. So we are trying to encourage more of those regional calls to get to know each other. And we also have this roundtable call that's open to all leaders once a month, which is another space to really just connect with each other. And I think we probably need to do a better job at letting people know about that, but that's definitely a good opportunity to connect.
Yeah, I just want to plus one to you, Fernando. I think that we can say in common speak, like all the national statutes, all the strategies we're trying to throw out there, like national roundtable calls and emails and all that kind of stuff. The real like commonsensical thing is that we want to be a real network, right? It's not just one chapter, it's nearly 100 that we can rely on each other. It's not just one regional governor or counselor. There's a bunch of us, It's not just one action team. There's so many, and we have thousands of people in this country that really care about slow food, and hundreds of people who are super active in it. And we want to just build those relationships so we can rely on each other and break down those silos. Anything else come up for folks? and especially any clarifying questions about something they read or didn't understand in the statute, or concerns or anything like that.
So Felix, hi, it's Stephanie from Slow Food Vegas.
Nice to have you.
Hello, so good to see you.
You see
We're
too.
gonna miss you.
Thank you. I miss you too. I'll be around.
Excellent. Good, clean, fair. We were just, be nice to have the actual definition. You know, it's referenced at the top under the mission and vision and all of that, but a lot of times things sound really good, and then when you go to operationalize them, that's where some of the vagueness comes in, and you know, what does that mean and what does it look like? So it might help to actually have a definition. So does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Makes total sense. And I think with that's what it takes. Like us writing statutes, as a staff working with like SFI and writing vision statements and stuff like that. But then having those systems in place, regional counselors can bring that conversation to their regions, chapters that can bring that conversation to the local organization, and us all talking together. And I say that waving my hands around because we're trying to figure out those systems and that architecture, but exactly right. And I think that the more we can co-create that, the better,
Another thing
Yeah.
Stephanie brought up, and Stephanie, you can jump in here too, but like how does a leader move to other parts of the network? Like if Stephanie's interested in being a regional counselor, what does that process look like? And we talked a little bit about term limits and rising counselors and kind of making more of a handoff and transition, but I think we can be more clear on that in this document. Dan, I think you're.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to underscore that co-creation piece that Felix included. We can provide. I hesitate to say that Slow Food USA should be providing definitions of good, clean, and fair when it's really good, clean, and fair are sort of guiding principles and values that it's up to local leaders and chapters to decide what that might look like for their local community. And not just a chapter coming in and saying, this is what good, clean, and fair looks like for Slow Food Vegas, but we've done some relationship building, we've done some exploring with our broader community, and this is what good, clean, and fair could look like. How do we, how do you all as chapter leaders have a piece in that co-creation of what good, clean, and fair looks like for all too, right? Like not just good, clean, and fair, but for all, underscore, exclamation point for all. And that can be a really simple but significant piece of strategy that you all work on, right? I'll give a really good example. For Slow Food Urban San Diego, we have an annual, or I'm not on the board anymore. They have an annual holiday party at the end of the year where they present I'm still going to say we, because I just had a meeting with them yesterday and it's got me all back in the Slow Food Urban space. Where we present the slate for new members who are going to be voted on. We kind of give a recap of the year and everything that went on. And one year we had an activity where we put these different like virtual snails, or not virtual snails because it was in real life before COVID, but we put these sticky note snails all on the wall. And we had one for good, one for clean, and one for fair. And this is an open to all of our membership. So folks who had maybe attended a chapter event earlier that year, maybe folks who actually had a membership with Slow Food USA, folks who were, past, present, future board members. It's kind of a slow food community gathering. And we had them define in their own words how they would describe good, clean, and fair. And we actually use that at our strategic retreat in January to have a community consensus of what good, clean, and fair looks like for folks in San Diego. And I think it's finding opportunities like that to get input from our community about what does it mean, not just for us as chapter leaders, but for, our members, for our broader community, for folks who maybe embody good, clean, and fair, but aren't necessarily formally engaged in the network. How can we create opportunities to get that feedback and let it guide us? Because you shouldn't be alone in trying to define what good, clean, and fair looks like. And there's opportunities to bring community voice. And that's also how we center EIJ sort of in this work too. So just wanted to say, I think it's our job in national office to provide some of these guiding principles and sort of describe how we think you all can align with it, but ultimately, how can we empower you all and give you the tools you need to do that community work to get those voices represented in your outlook as well. I feel like I took up a lot of time, but I hope that was helpful.
Definitely, thank you, Dan. And I'm hoping if there's a key takeaway here, just kind of help wrap up and take our next steps, is that in the end, if it's guiding principles or visioning good, clean, and fair, or talking about the best way to file your IRS 990, or how to throw an event at a farmer's market, right? Any of those multitude of things that we do as Slow Food to keep it going. The number one thing as we look at these statutes, if we talk about collaboration, I really, really want to challenge us this year to connect, because the whole world's trying to connect, right? COVID has separated us, right? But that's what Slow Food should be focused on too. Like, what does it mean for chapters to be in conversation with national, have regions be together? It just means, be it pigeon message, emails, coffee one day, Zooms, phone calls, whatever it may be that works for y'all, is that challenge of us figuring out how can we connect. That's the main thing. Once those connections are there, whatever works. Maybe something works in the Southwest is very different than how it works in the Northeast. But however we connect, that's how we start. And that's what it means. So we really would challenge our network to connect with each other. And with that said, before we go to one point of connection, Brian, I don't have the link right here, is how did this session go? We do have a quick survey. It is quick. I think it's 4 questions. If you would love to see, hey, how did this go? What more do you want to see? Was this good? We'd love to see the survey so we can create better points of connection coming up further. And I want to remind folks too, please comment on that Google Doc that they shared. Dan, myself, Anna, all the editors will try to be on it as much as we can, answering comments. So please comment on the national statute. It's our national statute, so please comment on it, and look out on February 1st. We're going to be sending out that survey to please ratify it, yay or nay, that this is something you would like to adopt. So anything else?
On that commenting process, really quick, Felix, we had a great question from Gwen, just sort of about the logistics of being in the doc and commenting. If you're not able to log in so that we know who is commenting and making the comments in case we need to follow up or ask any other questions or continue the discussion off the doc, go ahead and just include your first and last name in your chapter. If you're not able to log in, if you're notice that you're posting anonymously, just tag with your name in your chapter. That way, if we need to follow up with you, we can.
Any last thoughts, y'all? It won't be the last meeting, so don't worry. This is not like the end all be all thought. But any last thoughts while we're here, and we'll see you next time.
Let's congratulate Dan on her new role.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got obviously some pretty large shoes to fill. So it's an honor to be able to take it over from Felix. And I'm just trying to be a sponge and soak up as much as I can from him over this next couple of weeks. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charity and Tiffany, for joining us. And we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, y'all. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Bye.